While Doom may rightfully be seen as the father of first-person shooters, Wolfenstein 3D is seen as the grandfather since it laid out the groundwork. While it focused on bigger and better things, it tasked Apogee with making a Wolfenstein 3D sequel. However, its software changed their mind and not wanting to work together raised Apogee and reworked it into an original IP, but how did it turn out? Let's find out together as I review Rise of the Triad, Dark War. Being the intended sequel to Wolfenstein 3D, Rise of the Triad uses the exact same engine. While it does have some similar quirks like push walls, slide doors, and a true lack of sector height and brightness, it still improves the engine in some fairly impressive ways. Naturally, it follows Doom's lead on having floor and ceiling textures, as well as fog and a fake type of heights with flat posts and floating platforms. It even has skyboxes. The flat posts sort of remind me of the build engine method, where it uses billboard sprites to construct bridges among other things to give the illusion of 3D. While it may not look as nice as Doom, it does have the advantage of having two pathways in the same space. Another nice function is that those floating platforms often move around, and there are also trampolines to launch you into the air. Between this and the flight power, it can actually get much more vertically inclined than Doom at times. Careful though, because verticality can be your enemy because you'll instantly die if you touch the side of the sky. I guess you fall to your death even with the flight power up. Your weapons are pretty basic for the most part. You start out with a pistol, but you can double it up, and you can also find an MP40. Naturally, they all use infinite ammo, so you'll generally be using the MP40 the second you find one, unless you need to be precise for the sake of picking up fragile life pickups. Your fourth slot is for explosive weapons, and is more reminiscent of more modern shooters because you can only hold one of them at a time. One little nitpick is that unlike those modern shooters, you don't hold a button to pick up a new one, it just drops your old one if you go over it, which can be a little annoying if you wanted to keep it. One neat little thing though is that the game actually remembers how much ammo a gun holds when you drop it, so you can come back for it later. The most basic is the bazooka, that does a decent amount of damage. You can also find a homing missile weapon, which are weaker than the bazooka, but obviously has the advantage of honing in on enemies, so they're useful if you suck at aiming. You know, like me. The split missile splits missiles off away from the center, but I learned to actually choose when they split by holding and releasing the fire button. Drunk missiles are generally good for crowd control because they scatter in every direction. I'm really not sure if they're called drunk missiles because the missiles act drunk because it's handy to have when you're drunk and seeing doubles, or if whoever invented it was clearly drunk at the time, but it's still pretty handy. Then you've got the firebomb, which is a pretty devastating weapon that explodes out in a cross shape, causing massive damage to any unlucky mook caught in it. Very good if you want to cause an extreme amount of damage to a room, or if you just want to pretend you're Bomberman. Then there's the firewall, perhaps my favorite of the bunch because it instantly fries any guy into a charred skeleton that xylophones into a pile. Useless against robots, but it's great against humans, and it's absolutely hilarious. Then there's a dark staff that functions kind of like a BFG in that it's powerful but it has a charge up, and then there's the Excalibat, perhaps not all that useful against most enemies, but it is infinite ammo. I suppose you could liken it to the Berserk Fist on Doom. It's powerful, but it's risky. To that end, you've got a few different enemy types against you to use those weapons on. You've got random old mooks armed with pistols, MP40s, and even occasionally bazookas. Obviously, the latter should be dealt with very carefully, but generally you can just stun dance them with the MP40, so don't waste your explosives unless there's a big crowd. Also, if you see one begging for his life, shoot to kill because he's faking it and will shoot you the second you turn your back. Over-patrol ones can annoyingly throw a net on you to stun you for a bit, but they're just as weak to fire, so just take them out as a priority. They're wearing black, so they very clearly stand out. Commandos can be a bit more of a hassle. They've got a bit more health, but can still be stun-locked with the MP40. Just make sure you keep your distance because those sacks of crap have grenades and you don't want to be hit by one of them. If you want to take them out quickly, a firewall or direct fire bomb will down them in a single shot. Then there's also robots to contend with. They're immune to bullets and they love to fire rockets at you. Go in with any explosive weapon, barring in mind they're also immune to the firewall. If you see ballistic crafts though, which are big column robots, don't even bother trying to fight them. Literally nothing in the game can lay a single scratch on them, but they do move in a circle, so just stay out of their way. There are also monks, which come in two variants. There are big old boys with lighter robes that are slow moving and can only hurt you up close, so just stay away from them. If you see a thinner, darker robed one though, be on alert because they can attack you from a distance. Like with anything else, both can be stunned with the MP40, but can obviously be very dangerous in a crowd. This is probably pretty obvious, but the thinner ones with dark robes should be your first priority since the light ones have to get up close to hurt you. There are also some bosses and stationary turrets, but that pretty much runs the gauntlet of enemies you'll be facing throughout the game. You'll want to find pickups to help you deal with them if you expect to survive very long. Monk meals are the most basic healing item that restore just one bit of your health. At face value, Priest Porridge doesn't seem to be much better, only restoring 2 bits, but the twist is you can use an explosive to heat them up and they restore a whopping 5 bits. Sometimes a simple hot meal is all you really need, especially if you're like me and have that odd combination of being stingy with explosive weapons in combat and inept enough to keep losing health a lot. If you happen to find a bazooka or homing missile laying around, go ahead and use that since it's the weaker of the weapons. Then you've got small and large monk crystals which restore 1 and 5 bits respectively, but they're pretty rare. You also have a life system of the game where life items give you a free life when you get 100 of them. They also come in 5, 10, and 25 variant packs. Since you can quick save very easily and losing your extra weapons is generally a sucky idea in any level, I never really got to use up lives. It's really more of a legacy holdover from Wolfenstein 3D, but I suppose you could use it as a self-imposed challenge or something. Then of course there's power-ups in the game. To start out with is 2 joke power-ups you probably don't want to get. The bouncing one is easily the worst of the bunch, as it can make opening doors a lesson in futility. It can actually get you killed if you run into the countless hazards around. I suppose I should probably take the time to say that hazards include push walls that can instantly kill you, spinning blades, pop-up spears, and lava walls and floors, so yeah, bad to have the bounce. The shroom is the other joke power-up, not nearly as devastating, but it jerks your vision all around. The one plus is that the enemies are lit up like neon lights, so at least you can more easily see the enemy that you have no hope of reliably aiming at. On to the actually good power-ups. Mercury Mode is the aforementioned flight mode that lets you go anywhere you want by jumping and crouching like in Duke 3D's jetpack. Dog Mode is kind of the funny power-up, as it makes you invulnerable and have a charge bark to kill weak enemies as well as a regular bite to chew through anything else. For some reason though, there seems to be a big problem with doors, as my game will sometimes crash when opening doors in dog form, and I've even gotten stuck in it before, so beware of doors. Naturally, the big behemoth you really want is God Mode. Much like Dog Mode, you're invulnerable, but this also takes the term God Mode more literally because you get a hand of God that fires heat-seeking projectiles, taking it way above the one from Doom. You'll generally want to run around and kill everything while it lasts. The deity likes to yawn a lot, so I theorize he's like Saitama from One Punch Man and becomes so bored with his unstoppable power that the form just becomes lost. If there's a real fault with Rise of the Triad, it's that sometimes the levels can be very cryptic. Keys are of course pretty obvious, but sometimes you'll hit a switch and be at a complete loss about what I actually did. Obviously that's not a problem if you've already played the level, or you can look up a YouTube video and nobody will blame you. Well, I won't, at least. I'm guilty of it too. There is a map system though, which can help determining which areas you haven't visited yet. Secrets, on the other hand, are much more justifiable to be cryptic. That's what they're there for, after all. Typically, it's a push wall somewhere or an upper platform to jump through, but one was insanely cryptic and required you to go into it at exactly the right time in the game. All in all, the gameplay is very solid. It can be a little cryptic at times, and some of the enemies can be a tad bullet sponge, but it definitely is a fun little upgrade over Wolfenstein 3D, even if it's overall less technically impressive and less replayable than Doom is. The story is every bit as complex as you could expect for a first-person shooter in the 90s, even if Tom Hall did have involvement in it. For the long and short of it, there's a team that was sent to investigate a cult and their boat was destroyed, leaving them stranded on the island. These operatives, known as the High-Risk United Nations Task Force, or just Hunt for short, must now stop the cultist schemes. The most you really have to know is that you can choose from one of 5 characters, but I always go with Eon, and totally not because his name's a P-joke. Well, okay, that's not the only reason. He also seems to be pretty well balanced in his stats. The plot may actually be simpler than Doom's. You just have to put an end to El Obscuro, the ancient dark force that can turn into a snake. One interesting note is that he also has larvae, and you have to destroy all of them before you destroy him, or else one will grow up in 30 years and destroy the Earth. There's really nothing to the plot, but it's a first-person shooter from the 90s, so it really doesn't need that much story. The remake flat out made fun of the idea of complex stories in a game.
A mission briefing? Seriously? You need a mission briefing? Alright.
It just has to be fun to play, and it has that much in spades. Just bear in mind you're not playing this game for its deeply involved narrative. As with the gameplay, Rise of the Triad is that interesting little hybrid of being somewhere between Wolfenstein 3D and Doom in the technical department. Its art style takes a more Mortal Kombat approach in which the graphics are digitized into it. That obviously includes all the human enemies, but the robot enemies were also digitized from actual little models, interestingly enough. Apparently the boss Sebastian's command chair was improvised with construction paper. Now that is creative. One neat thing is that there are a lot of objects in the environment that you can shoot out. That honestly may not sound like much, but it was actually released before Duke 3D, so it was something of a pioneer in that regard. You can even see the overall brightness in a room go down when you shoot out all the lights. As it lacks proper sector brightness like in the classic Doom, it takes more of a Doom 2016's classic levels approach where it just brightens and darkens when you enter different rooms. It's a bit of a hacky solution, but it's probably a better one than Nightmare 3D just changing textures to represent a blackout. Guns and explosives sound very beefy, but it's pretty obvious the dev team did all the voices. They sound surprisingly good on a technical level, not any obvious compression, but it's definitely got an amateur 90s charm to it.
Outsider.
It's kind of like the original Resident Evil, and I kind of dig it given the game is very obviously taking a pretty goofy tone to it. One really neat thing is that in the main menu it has quit messages like in Doom and the like, but with execution methods for your character. Now, it's just a thumbnail and an audio clip if you press Y, but it's still pretty nifty regardless. Rise of the Triad's presentation has a very 90s style, for better or worse. I find it very charmingly nostalgic to see all the digitized things in the game, and the audio sounds surprisingly well for its time. The new Rise of the Triad remake is arguably a ton more technically impressive, but the original still has that retro charm if you're into that, and yes, I'm obviously going to use charm a lot because obviously I am. Rise of the Triad is certainly a very fun little first-person shooter for its time. It's not exactly standout amazing, and the Wolfenstein engine limitations ultimately restrain it compared to Doom, and the abundance of bullet sponge hit scan enemies certainly don't help, but it's still a very fun 90s shooter and very much rooted in that kind of charm. It doesn't take itself super seriously, and if you're willing to not take it super seriously yourself, there's a lot of fun to be had with it. Give it a try if you just want to go around shooting triads and just having pure old entertainment. Thank you so much for watching my review, and I'll see you next time.